Good evening. Welcome to Washington National Cathedral. So glad to see those of you who are gathered in the nave, and a special welcome as well to those who are joining us online. I'm Mariann Budde, Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, and on behalf of all of the Cathedral community and the diocese, and especially Randy Hollerith, the dean, who would be here tonight, except he was called away just moments ago for a pastoral emergency, and so sends his deep regrets for not being with us tonight. But he, along with all of us, are just so excited for this conversation. This conversation with me and Tim Shriver on the concepts and the importance of dignity in our private and public lives. This is part of the Cathedral's A Better Way initiative, which, as you may know, is a series of events designed to help us as a people live together, learn from each other, and find our way forward as a nation. And in just a moment, I will officially welcome Tim Shriver and say a bit more about him. But I'd like us to begin, if you would join me in a time of quiet and prayer, where we can bring all the concerns of our hearts and of this world, and particularly to share our grief with those in our city mourning the murder of Yaron Lazinski and Sarah Milgram, a young couple in love, employees of the Israeli embassy, dedicated to humanitarian causes, to the state of Israel, and from all accounts were among the most inspired young people you would ever want to know. So we pray for their souls and those who grieve their loss. Let us pray. Gracious God, as we gather this evening to reflect upon the dignity of every human being and renew our commitment to follow the path of love as revealed to us in Jesus and all those whose souls are infused with your compassionate spirit. We pray this night for the souls of Yaron and Sarah, for their heartbroken families, friends, and colleagues, and for the man who took their lives and now face the consequences of his deeds. May we rededicate ourselves tonight to the highest ideals you place before us, and for doing our part to rid the world of such crimes and all that deprives your people the fullness of life you desire for us all. May we be instruments of your dignity and your peace. Amen. Okay, so sometime last summer, maybe it was the early fall, amid the fervor and the exhaustion that led up to the presidential election, I stumbled upon a podcast interview, or maybe it was a radio program with you, dear Tim, talking about something called the Dignity Index. And initially, I confess it didn't penetrate my thoughts very deeply, not the first time around. But you know how the Holy Spirit works sometimes. It seemed like in a series of other conversations and books and articles that kept coming my way, a few themes were reinforcing themselves in my mind. Themes like the culture of contempt, the outrage industrial complex. Someone suggested I read a book by Donna Hicks entitled Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, and then a second book by Hicks, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People. So now I'm intrigued and searching for more, and then Tim Shriver's name again appears on some screen somewhere, and I sit down to watch a presentation that Tim gave at the Aspen Ideas Festival last summer on the Dignity Index. And now, friends, I'm walking around like a recent convert. asking everyone I know to watch the same presentation and go to the Dignity Index. And should you decide right now to type into your computer or your smartphone's search engine, Dignity Index, you will immediately be met with this question. If you could help ease the divisions in America, would you do it? And then there's this little sentence underneath it or two. Our disagreements aren't causing the divisions in our country. It's what we do when we disagree. Do we treat the other side with dignity, or do we treat them with contempt? The first brings us together, the second drives us apart. And then if you push a little button that says if you want to take the dignity pledge, you'll go to another page that has this. It says, as an American who knows and loves my country, I'm convinced there is no America without democracy. There's no America without democracy. There's no democracy without healthy debate. And there's no healthy debate without dignity. Therefore, I pledge to do more, to treat others with dignity and not contempt. Needless to say, I'm thrilled beyond words to have the opportunity with all of you to hear Tim speak to us about the initiative he co-founded to bring the tools of dignity into our public and private discourse as an antidote to the culture of contempt that moves like a cancer in our social fabric. And I'm just going to say a couple things about him, and then I'll give him the stage. And this is my favorite. When you look on websites looking for biographies, my favorite comes from the Special Olympics International website. It says this: Tim Shriver leads the Special Olympics International Board of Directors, and together with 6 million Special Olympic athletes in more than 200 countries, he promotes health, education, and a more unified world through the joy of sport. That would be enough right there.
That is enough.
Isn't that enough?
That's enough.
That's enough. Okay, I'm almost done. So you've got this wonderful long bio with lots of wonderful things about you. You're married, you're a father of 5. You began your career as an educator and co-founded the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, whole host of degrees. It fails to mention the most important, however, for this community. Tim Shriver is a graduate of St. Albans School. Barely, apparently. So I'm done here after Tim's presentation, which I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to give now, so that I'll stop talking. I have a few questions that I will pose, but we also want to allow you, both here and from your homes, to use the QR code if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make, and we want to leave enough room for as many of those as we can. So without further ado, would you join me in welcoming Tim Shriver to Washington National Cathedral?
Well, all I can say is the honor to be in the presence of the nation's moral voice has now been outdone by the honor. Yes, that's actually. The equal honor is to be a St. Albans kid who could almost didn't walk across this stage about 50 years ago to try to get a diploma, but maybe the highest honor is to be married to an Episcopalian, Linda Potter, and be invited to stand on this stage in the nave of the cathedral. I'm very, very, yes. Yeah. I'm so grateful that the Holy Spirit did her job and keeping you and bringing you back. We were going to, Bishop Budde, we were going to be redesigning the website, but not anymore, not after you've just recited the entire thing. We're going to save some money on that redesign. I want to join you in expressing the grief that so many of us are feeling, even if we didn't know last night's victims, even if we didn't know them by name or by experience. The sense in which this kind of violence can just shatter our lives suddenly, without warning, without explanation, without any outcome that's positive. Many of us, I know, in a room this size, have had that experience. And it's devastating. It's, there's no explanation, there's no source of consolation, certainly not in the short term, except maybe to recognize that the deception of violence once again is revealed. That somehow violence will produce something good. Why we humans continue to labor under that illusion, I don't entirely know, but we can at least grieve not just these two lives, not just the hatred and anti-Semitism that produced their cruel murder, but also the use of violence itself. Maybe someday, and maybe in our own small way we can contribute to a change. I'm going to share with you slides. I know that sounds crazy in a place like this, but I wanted to give some sense of what this work is like on dignity with a little bit more of an analytic lens than you might be used to seeing in a presentation like this. I won't be long, I hope. If I get long, somebody can scream at me. But I wanted to share a little bit the details of the work, and I wanted to start with this quote from Dr. King. Many of you have heard it, maybe some of you put it on your wall or have it in your quote book. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And we hear quotes like this, but I want to ask you today not just to listen to it, but to bring to mind, if you can, an example in your own life of where hate was driven out by love. And if you can't think of one, just think of when your children were teenagers. And you most surely tried to use love to drive out what might have seemed like a lot of contempt. But more seriously, I haven't used this slide very often, but I used it last week. I presented to a group of teachers, and a teacher almost in the front row, about 200 teachers, said, "I'd like to share my example." I said, "Go for it." So he said, this is up in New York City. He says, I live in a rough neighborhood, and I was walking down the street a couple days ago, and I saw this guy coming at me, and I knew it was trouble. And in my neighborhood, we know when trouble comes, you better be ready for it. And I saw him, he crossed the street, he came right towards me, and I took a deep breath in the moment. And as he got closer to me, I said, "Be blessed." And he paused, and he said back to me, "You be blessed." And he walked by me. And the teacher said, "I just wanted to share that." And I want to share it with you because in some very concrete way, I think it's a reminder that the tools of transformation are within us. These are not obscure gifts that have to be studied in academic settings. They're not refined skills that have to be shaped by advanced degrees. The tools of transformation that Dr. King talks about in this slide are within us. But it may also seem a little bit almost silly to suggest that they're going to be easy in this day and age. If we go to the next slide, there's no clicker, so you're going to hear me. Let's go to the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. I think what Dr. King is saying, and this is perhaps the most important point I can make, because wherever you land on this issue, I hope you see, as a result of Bishop Budde's leadership and the work many of us in this work are trying to do, I hope you see that we have a new issue in our country. It is not like the old issues which we have worked on, many of which are very important to us, many of which we feel very, very stridently about. We have another issue. Dr. King raised it over a half century ago. How we treat each other, not what we think about the future, not where our politics lead us, not how we want to advocate for our goals, but how we treat one another when we disagree. My goal tonight is to make the case that if we don't address this issue, we will not be able to address the other issues that confront us as a country or as a community or even in faith communities, where the divisiveness is so strong. Next slide. Our view stems in part from what we call the contempt industrial complex. Contempt is not new to humanity. We know that. That's not news. But cruelty and dehumanizing others today is everywhere. We scoff at those on the other side. We call them out. The algorithm rewards us. The snottier and the meaner and the snidder your barbs are against someone else, the more likes, the more pickup, the more support you'll get. Partisan media scoffs at people and reminds you that you're under threat. Political leaders jump into the contempt industrial complex and use it to raise money, gain position, and gain fame. It's like our whole culture has become what I think of as almost like a narcissism. We live in the sense in which selfishness is survival and contempt is the winning strategy. Contempt is not new, but the normalization and the lionization and the admiration of contempt is a new dimension of our lives. So what we also know is that while contempt may make you feel superior to others, it makes you also fear them. Contempt may make, we'll go to the next slide, contempt may make you believe that you can dehumanize them and by doing so advance your own humanity. In other words, it almost seems obvious to us that the more we attack the other people, the more our position that is righteous and strong and good and in the interest of all people, that I will advance it. And we see this in political speeches over and over again. We score them from time to time, and almost everyone includes both. Most politicians will start by saying, we're here to fight against those people. They've gone too far, they've taken it too far, they've made egregious mistakes. We will not tolerate them. They are the problem in our country and they're trying to destroy us. And then the second half of the speech says, and we're here to remind everybody that everyone belongs. And we don't even notice. We don't even notice. We'll go to the next slide. So, as one person said to me, I hate hateful people. What do you want me to do about it? I'm guessing, we'll get to a little interactivity here in just a second, but I'm guessing that almost everyone in this room loathes hateful people. And I bet you, if I'd asked you before, you'd say you hate them. Because you don't hear it. The contempt industrial complex has a stake in keeping you deceived about yourself because it keeps you coming back for more. Let's keep going. Our view, next slide. Yes, I just keep saying this. It's Matt, I think. Matt, next, no, just stay with this slide. Our view is that there is a continuum here that's maybe simplifying complexity, but in the search for clarity, that the antidote to contempt, here we have the great words, in my view, of the great teacher I know many of you share in an admiration for Richard Rohr, where he writes, for the planet, for all living beings to move forward, we can rely on nothing less than an inherent original goodness and a universally shared dignity. Now, he didn't come up with this. We have this in all of our sacred texts, whichever religious faith we follow. We have this in many of the teachings we learned from our parents when we were children. My mother used to say, don't use the word hate. It was a dirty word in our house. I don't know if any of you had that. She, for some reason, said, you can call them, say they have elephant ears, but don't say you hate them. I don't know where elephant ears came from, but that was just my house. But this message that everybody has some part of them that is inherently good and deserving of protection, some sacred space, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, is in our view the antidote to contempt. As Bishop Budde said, we built not just the premise here, but a lot of times you hear somebody say stuff like that, and you go, well, yeah, of course everybody knows that. Well, how are we going to know? How are you going to make a difference with that kind of a theory? So we said, well, how about if we build a score? So the next slide, you'll see the dignity index. And you have it in your seat so you don't have to read these little itty-bitty words. But here's what the dignity index is designed to do. It's designed to provide an objective tool that allows you to see on a continuum a way to grade and score the words people use when they talk about someone they disagree with. It is not a fact checker. It's not a checker of who's morally superior or inferior. It just invites you to isolate one dimension of your life: how you treat people when you disagree with them. That's it. One simple thing. It starts at the bottom. A 1 is the language of violence. It's the language of genocide. They're not even human. Well, I won't go through this in detail, but at a 2, they're evil, they're threatening, they're going to ruin our country, we've got to get rid of them. A 3, a little less so. A 3 is, we're the good people. How many people think their political party is the good people? Okay. So when you talk that way, you're a 3. But we'll come back to scoring you in just a second. That's 3 language. A 4 is, well, we're just better. It's not quite us versus them. We're just kind of our group. You know, after all, Episcopalians we've known for a long time are just a little better, right? Catholics actually think that. I'm going to be honest. On the upper half of the index, you start to see the levels of dignity. So from 4 down, you're getting worse and worse. From 5 up, you're getting better and better. At a 5, we have a conversation, Bishop Budde and I. Look, we don't agree on this, but you get your say, I get mine. That's a little bit of dignity, right? Equal time, right? Secretary, you know, you're sitting at the room, I get my say, somebody else gets their say. At a 6, wait a second, let's have a little bit of a deeper conversation, Molly. Let's actually find out there must be something we agree on. Maybe we can find common ground somewhere. Diplomats do this for a living. Let's find something we agree on. 7 is when we start to get into a much more, slightly different zone. Because a 7 enters the conversation open to the fact they might be wrong. A little humility, right in the face of a tense disagreement. And an 8, while continuing to hold to their principles, the 8 language will start to sound like, I get it, no matter what. I see there's good in you, no matter what. I will not rob you of your dignity in this conversation. So that's the scale. I give you one example which is painful. I put this in yesterday before last night's events, but I'll share it with you anyway. Let's go. I'll just give you an example of how this works. The next slide. What's a 1? A 1 goes from violent words to violent actions. It's a combination of feeling that the other side is less than human. They've lost their license. The next slide. The top quote here is from the Rwandan genocide, spoken by Leon Mugesera. Wipe out this scum. Anyone whose neck you don't cut is the person who's going to cut yours. And as we all know, the carnage of the Rwandan genocide is almost unrivaled in history. This language became normative in the hours and days leading up to and into the genocide. The bottom quote is in the middle of the Shoah, at the beginning actually of the Shoah, the great terror of the Holocaust, where you see the language very clear. I don't care. We don't care whether you live or die or starve to death. All we care about is whether you serve our culture. That's one language. Now I bring this up, we'll go to the next slide and have a little fun on this just quickly. So click the first one there. Okay, so this is a little bit more familiar to some of you. This is a social media post for those of you who scroll. Taylor Swift is a psycho. She's the cancer of the music industry. Seriously, never seen such a fame-hungry and stats-obsessed artist in my life. So here's your first test. How do you score it? Look at your scorecard. Yeah, just when you thought you were going to get to relax and enjoy the conversation. How would you score it? Anybody want to shout out a score? I see 2s. Anything else? I see a few 3s. Okay, click again. We'd score this a 3. She's not yet actually a dangerous person here. There's a sense in this one, you see the 3 language is really about she's bad, but she's not getting to the point of evil, right? This is still about music. She hasn't become a horrible person. So that's why we'd give that a 3 rather than a 2. Let's do one more. I'd have someone read this, but we don't have big enough microphones. So this is from Mahatma Gandhi. I claim to be a simple individual, liable to err like any other fellow mortal. I own, however, that I have humility enough to confess my errors and retrace my steps. It's unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom. It's healthy to be reminded that the strongest might weaken and the wisest might err. Scorecards, look at your scorecards. 7, is that an 8? 7, 8, 7, 6. Anybody 2? No, just kidding. Okay, these are easy. That's a 7. And the telltale sign of the 7 is, as I said earlier, when we're in the conversation, when I'm talking to Linda, and I start out by saying, well, we cannot agree on this, but I want to acknowledge I could be wrong. I want to listen here. I don't think I'm wrong. I feel strongly here, but I want to be open to understanding your point of view on the grounds it might change me. That's the telltale sign of a 7, interaction. Let's keep going. So there's a couple of things that have come out in this that I think are really fascinating, at least for us, and I think, Bishop, you've seen this in some of your conversations. The first thing is when we first trained people in the use of this index, we prepared them to score politics. Because we thought if we scored people in politics, they'd start to pay attention and they'd want to get better scores. And the students said to us, you know, we'll do it if you want us to, but actually this has been more interesting for us to use for ourselves. I use it, students said, when I'm with this woman in my dorm who I just can't stand. I use it when my father calls me on Sunday and he's always drives me nuts. And I've tried now to change the way I talk to him when he calls. So this concept, and this is, in a setting like this, we can play a lot around with these ideas. This concept is almost the equivalent of a religious opening or metanoia. When you think, or the plank in my eye versus the splinter in yours, remember these texts? All of a sudden, the index has the capacity, it seems, to awaken us to ourselves. A less than comfortable conversation, many times. So I'm going to ask you now to score, not me or Mahatma Gandhi, but yourself. The last time you talked about politics, yeah, I know. Just be honest. You're not going to be challenged on it, so you can be honest. You know, when your confessor or somebody says, you can be honest, no one's going to judge you. So be honest. When you talk about the other party, what's your score? Don't tell me. I want you to be honest, so that if you tell me, or here's what another way I could trick you into giving me the right answer. What do you think other people's score is? What do you think most people score when they talk politics? 2. It's about right. 2 is just north of 1. And here's the problem. You talk 2, someone else hears 1. You talk about how dangerous and disgusting those people are. You don't be surprised if you hear the polling numbers go up that people are tolerating violence, because dangerous and disgusting, which is two, is just a hair's breadth over, they gotta go. And when we look at the carnage of the last few years, whether in Charleston or Buffalo or the synagogue in Pennsylvania or last night, what we're seeing is politically inspired violence that is driven, at least in my view, in part by the overall degradation of our rhetoric about one another. And this is where the challenge comes, and I hope the bishop will help me get out of this, but that we have to kind of admit that we're all part of the problem. This is a moment for me to say, I hope when you walk out of here and you're angry about politics and about something being done, I hope you're angry about the issue, and I hope you understand your own responsibility to address the issue in ways that reduce the amount of contempt and hatred in our country. That's the mirror effect. Let's do one or two other quick points, and then I'll get the bishop back up here. Next slide. The second secret weakness we found here, secret thing we found in using the dignity index, is that contempt operates in disguise. You don't see it when you use it. But once you start to see it, it's hard to use it. So as we grow in self-awareness, we actually almost intuitively grow in dignity, because we don't want to stay at a 2. Contempt has tricked us, like the woman who said she hates hateful people, because she doesn't see it. Contempt hides. Think of the religious history we have in the West. How many violent, horrible wars have been used in the name of religion? Nobody fighting them thought they were being hateful. They thought they were right. They thought they were they had to do this. This was in the interest of the glory of God, the destruction, the carnage. So we've got to be better at unseating the contempt that lives within us, and at least seeing it for what it is, so that the moralizing and the self-righteousness and the ego defenses that we all have that cause us to want to use it, we gotta get them, are at least tempered by an awareness that we have options. Let's keep going. We're almost done. So here's what the last question we get asked quite a lot, which is, this is Bishop Desmond Tutu writing in the Book of Forgiveness, which he worked with Donna Hicks, who Bishop Budde mentioned. He writes, I've sat with men on condemned men on death row, spoken with former police officers. I've visited child soldiers who have committed acts of nauseating depravity. And I've recognized in each of them a depth of humanity that was a mirror of my own. Now, if you can score that, it's pretty easy. That's an 8. But here's what everybody asks. Is that realistic? Come on. You can't expect me. I'm a Democrat. I'm running for office. For God's sakes. I'm the mayor of Hagerstown. I'm running a business here. I got to get people to perform. You want me to do this? Come on. It's ridiculous. So this is an 8. Next slide. And what I want to leave you with tonight is an invitation for those of you who are part of a faith tradition, or this one, and if you're a part of no faith tradition, to at least consider the wisdom of the faith traditions. And I'm going to do one more quote here. Let's put it up. My view is that 8 is actually accessible to us. The next slide. This is another quote from Father Rohr, and I think it's important for tonight as a turning point for our conversation. The biblical tradition, and Jesus in particular, praises faith more than love. Why, he writes, because faith is that patience with mystery that allows us to negotiate the stages. Gerald May, some of you may have known Gerald May, pointed out in The Dark Night of the Soul, it allows God to lead us through the darkness where God knows and we don't. Thus, and this is the kicker, this is the only way we come to love. Love is the true goal, but faith is the process of getting there. Hope is the willingness to live without resolution or closure. He says, these are indeed the three things that last. Having faith does not have to do with being perfect. It has to do with staying in relationship. Think of your country now, staying in relationship, hanging in there, holding on to your country, to your family, to your friend who is dating someone of those people, to your cousin, hanging on to union as tightly as God holds on to us. It's not a matter of being correct, but it's a matter of being connected. So my hope is that this index, which is building a movement, the next slide will show you, I'm going to skip, go through this quickly. Stop here. Almost everybody says, what do you want us to do? The culture's too strong. One guy, Marty Barron, when he was the editor of the Washington Post, told me, good luck with what you're doing. You're up against a $2 trillion business. And I said, game on. That's when people really sparkle. When they know there's an obstacle and they know it's going to be tough and they know the odds are against them, that's just about as American as a story can sound. We have the option, every one of you, people say to me, what do you want me to do? Start. Well, how did this tradition that built this cathedral start? People started looking and saying, well, who are those guys? What? Look at those people. They all, you know what this says in the text? They seem to love each other. Well, let's go find out what they're doing. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Start something different. Engage with people in something different. End the temptation to seek revenge as a way of solving problems. It won't work. Contempt and hatred have the invariant effect of making an enemy for your cause. And the short-term buzz you feel from putting that thing on social media and getting a lot of people telling you, that was great, Dad, that was great, Susie, that was great, honey. Wow, you really got him on that one. The short-term buzz is destroying our country. We've got to try a different way. Thank you very much for listening. Bishop Budde, back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you can continue to call me Bishop Budde if you want, but then I have to call you Dr. Shriver, okay?
What do you think? Sounds pretty good, right?
So,
nobody calls me that.
all right.
No. Okay, Mariann.
Or you can call me Mariann, and I'll call you Tim.
Thank you.
Wow. So I take the dignity quiz pretty regularly, and you can go online and you can, there's examples of speech, and you can guess which they are. I almost always get them wrong. And the ones that always trip me up, actually, are very strong statements that I would, and they're statements in defense of somebody else's dignity. And I want to score them lower because they're strong. But the index says taking a stand for someone else's dignity is actually somewhere like a 6. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about that, because there are so many instances when, and maybe I'm speaking on behalf of those of us who are really concerned about people who are kind of at the crosshairs of all the social conversations we're having. And we wonder how to maintain dignity. Anyway, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. Just the fact that taking a stand on the behalf of other people's dignity can be experienced as contemptuous, but the score would suggest otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things we try to point out here, which you're getting at, is that the dignity index isn't asking you to compromise your principles. There is nothing in any of this that suggests that, for instance, if you feel strongly that the actions of the current administration on immigration are morally or ethically or personally offensive, nothing in this suggests, and I suggest that nothing in our religion suggests, Jesus doesn't say love injustice.
Right.
He says love your enemies, right? So what we're trying to do is distinguish here between the fierce determination to oppose injustice and the temptation to hate a human being who is the perpetrator of the injustice. Those two don't have to go together. So when someone, to your point, when someone stands up strongly for the dignity of another person with passion and with conviction, that doesn't suggest that they're operating out of contempt. Unless they say, I'm sticking up, you're a vulnerable person for whatever reason, I'm sticking up for you against those jerks, those horrible people, the evil people that are coming to get you, I'm going to defend you. Okay, excuse me, that would score more low. But fierce pursuit of your principles is what we want in this country. Like you said in the beginning, differences of opinion are not the problem. Differences of opinion are the solution. That's what we want. Everybody here has a vote. So everybody here, there's only, what, 200, 300, 400 of us, but everybody here has an opinion. That's fine. That's good. If you're so terrified to express your opinion because you're going to be shouted down, laughed at, fired, name-called, humiliated, we don't have free speech. We don't have a democracy any longer. We have a fear-based state. So passion is not to be discouraged. If I can say it should be discouraged, hatred and contempt are to be discouraged. I
Yeah, it's just a fascinating existential experience, trying to find that. What I've noticed in many of our congregations, and I understand the impulse completely, which is in the desire to create, even often saying a desire to create a counterculture, we just don't talk about these things.
Right.
We just don't talk. And then the list of things that we don't talk about just keeps on growing, right?
Because we're scared.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I spent a lot of time today trying to craft a very simple statement about grief of 2 people being killed.
Yeah.
Right? Just because of the context in which their death took place, and because of all the different ways that speech is interpreted. So it's a poignant time. I'd like to, I'm not going to dominate this because I'd love to hear what questions are coming forward. Margaret, if you're starting to collect the questions, I'd love to bring them up. But on the Dignity Index website today, one of your colleagues was talking about in greater depth what you mentioned here, is that there isn't any of us here that would say that we like contempt as individuals. And if we live long enough with these concepts, we recognize the mirror effect in ourselves. Right. I do. But it's still growing as our culture. So the answer, according to your colleagues, is if we want to challenge a culture, he said, we have to build a new culture. So I just wonder, you were kind of brief in your remarks, but can we just spell out what building a new culture looks like in the context of the things we're dealing with, not going off over here and creating the culture that we all get to live in, but is a bubble?
Yeah.
Just a little thought on that.
Well, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. So we didn't design this for schools, but we've had lots of K-12 systems show interest in this work because teachers and principals and people responsible for discipline are finding challenges with name calling and various forms of group hate and so on. And so one school has created a new standard, and they call it 5 and up. And more schools are using the index to try to create a culture of disagreement within the school that actually teaches kids how, when they're tempted to call you a name, how to move up to at least a 5. So you can teach this in a school. We've seen this. We were invited to come to a school district in Oklahoma recently that had just had a racist incident. And the governor of Oklahoma, very conservative, Governor Kevin Stitt, his statement after this racist incident in a small district in Oklahoma was, I took the Dignity Index pledge and I'm challenging the students and the families in your community to do it too. And so we've been out there training teachers and kids in how to see themselves and how to see the potential to move up. Now, it's the Tishmingo School District, and I hope I pronounced that right. But the point is, they're starting. They're starting. The governor of Oklahoma, I think, and we see this, we don't necessarily celebrate these things, but when Governor Shapiro's house was bombed recently, attacked, his family was attacked, his statement right afterward was very affirming of the need to persevere in his faith, in being open to all the faiths, in not succumbing to hatred. So you see all of a sudden, in the midst of this moment of crisis, a leader moving up and challenging people in his state to move up and challenging his fellow politicians to move up. Now you could say he's going to get drowned out by you-know-who, but that's not the point. The point is we got to do our little thing. So you don't have to, we've got companies where, very big companies as a matter of fact, that are now asking us to bring dignity to their employees because it's a leadership skill, because they're having so many HR-related problems with people not feeling comfortable disagreeing, not feeling comfortable talking.
Actually, one of the reasons we tried so hard to have this conversation tonight was because on the Cathedral Close, among the schools and the Cathedral, we were talking about those very same things. And also how to bring something that was inherently positive and something that we could work toward into perhaps even to the school curriculums going forward here on the Cathedral Close. So we might be inviting.
That's what I got pitched. I said, will you come over and talk to some teachers? I said, sure, I'll come over and talk to teachers. The next thing you know, she invited all you guys to come too. So
yeah, once we started
flattered.
it, we weren't
very flattered.
That's going to be the Diocese of Washington, 5 and above. That's what we'll go for. This is my last question. I've been, for the last week or so, I've been reading Fully Alive, which is the first book that I saw that you had written. And it's, among other things, it's a story of your life, which is really fascinating. And you have, in that book, you have a pretty compelling description of the power of centering prayer. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share with us something of what because that happened to you relatively early in your life compared to where you are now, how that insight into perhaps your experience or first persuasion of what you quoted from Richard Rohr, how that had an impact on the way your life evolved.
Okay. Well, the short answer is that I believe that some form of practice of silence, which is present in every single major religious tradition, but often forgotten, I'm sorry to say, by religious leaders who have been mostly trained to teach creed and culture, morals, ethics, all of which are great, but they have not largely been trained to teach us the practice of silence. And I think it's a gigantic oversight, and I think the good news is that contemplative practice, centering prayer, Christian meditation, Zen, all these different forms of Vipassana, many different forms of meditation are growing in popularity. And I think the reason, I'll get to me now, is that I think to remove concepts and distractions and, to the extent you can, the baggage of the dualistic mind from consciousness, even for a second, literally. Like I can sit for 20 minutes and if I get one good second, and I mean one good second,
I'm with you on that one.
It's a transformative experience because it allows us access, in the language of the Dignity Index, it allows us access to the dignity within us. You know, Thomas Merton calls it the point within you that you will never have access to, the point vierge, he calls it, the point within you that belongs to God alone. And I think the root of most religions is the discovery of that. People found it and they said, wow, let's start a religion about this. And then they tried to teach it, and then you get stories and narratives and extraordinary miracles and all kinds of things. But the point of beginning is the point of discovery, that without doing anything, nothing you earn, do, say, look like, achieve, you've already got it within you. It's already there. And when you know, when I get my 1 second, it's enough to sustain me in trying harder. I'm not going to claim any achievement here, but it's enough to sustain me in trying harder to see it in someone else. If I give a plug for, if you don't know, maybe many of you know this, but Howard Thurman's great commencement speech at Spelman College in
1980.
1980. Thank you.
It's great.
Our senses. This is so exciting. Where he describes to the graduates the exhortation to seek the sound of the genuine within you. That's his language. Seek the sound of the genuine. And then at the end of the address, he says, because when you find the sound of the genuine deep down inside of you, you will see it in someone else. And when you go down in you, you can come up in another human being. And you can see what Bishop Tutu said in that quote, my common humanity notwithstanding everything. Bishop Tutu doesn't say those people should be walking free. He doesn't say those acts of nauseating depravity are okay. He just says, I can see in you, no matter what, that sacred spark. And that's the practice that this centering prayer taught me to at least start in. But I'm definitely a beginner 40 years later.
Amen. Thank you for that. Thank you. Margaret, do we have questions from our friends here? Oh my. Okay. Double-sided. Let's see what we got.
Easy ones, please.
Okay, all right.
She hasn't found an easy one yet.
All right, let me just scan the sheet here. Okay. 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 I'm going to try to get to most of these. There are some common themes. So let's just start with one that touches upon many. Okay, here's an easy one. If faith is the crux, aren't you suggesting that atheists are incapable of love? That seems rather undignified. And I
want to respect the dignity of the questioner, but challenge the facticity that's implied. I did not intend to. If I did, it was unintentional. Unintentional to suggest that any kind of devotional religious conviction is essential to this. But I do think that the natural human experience of discovering within yourself something you can believe in helps a lot to sustain your capacity to love in the face of the trials of life. Mm-hmm. I'm not telling you to go to church, and I'm not telling you to say this creed or bow in this direction or that direction, but I am telling you don't give up on believing in something bigger than yourself. I think it helps. But I'm not judging people, by the way. That doesn't mean I'm saying if you don't agree with me on that, you're a bad person. I just have a strong conviction about that. And part of my conviction is because I want you to see how beautiful you are.
I think that that's a critique that I am also needing to listen to in the way that I speak about my own life and my own faith. And certainly the more strong statements within our faith tradition that would encourage any of us to imagine that there's a superiority in our tradition or in our faith, or so I think that that's a legitimate critique of the religious enterprise, and it is also, I talked earlier about the enthusiasm of being a convert to anything, right? There is that energy that comes when we have found something of value that we want. We just can't believe that others aren't going to find it too. But so I think we can all cross into that sphere.
And I just want to maybe add, when I'm on, like, we have staff calls with our little team, people constantly say, Tim, that was a 3. I'm like, okay, you're right. So this is not a quest for perfection, it's a quest for conversation, if I can put it that way. We're trying to create, like, an issue doesn't tell you what the answer to the issue always will be. It says there's a new context for how we can talk about this issue of how we treat each other. So if anything that I said suggests that therefore I am the icon of how to treat people with dignity, that's not true. I have more than enough work to do on my own, and am happy to be challenged when I fall short. I'm not always happy to be challenged, but I should be challenged.
There are a number of questions that get into the same ballpark of this one, and so I'm going to read one, but many of you have variations on this theme. This one is perhaps the most colorful, and I don't mean that in a negative way. In discussions between people who disagree, the person who expresses some willingness to be wrong sounds weaker than those who refuse to express any humility. And so it seems that the speaker who scores a 2 in that moment wins. Carries the day, right?
Yeah.
Which is sort of a way of just acknowledging that what you were saying earlier, you're up against a power that is so much bigger than the humility that higher scores encourage us toward.
Well, to speak in 2 language is alluring. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. It feels good. And it can make you feel like you won. There's 0 chance you convince the other person to agree with you. So if what you want to do is win the feel-good contest, or look-good contest, you can win with contempt. I mean, again, our traditions tell us evil is alluring. I wish it weren't, but it is. And I'm not above it. So in the moment, when humility looks like weakness, it's because evil, I won't moralize quite that much, it's because contempt is alluring. But it is not successful. We talk to business people about this. They're interested in this, I shouldn't say it that way. They have a lot of interest in efficiency and getting things done. They're interested in this because it helps them solve problems. It helps them make sure that the 6 people on the team each get their best ideas in the mix before the leader of the team makes a decision, right? So they're trying to make it possible for the leader of the team to say, hey, look, I don't necessarily know the answer to this. Let's get everybody's answer. That's a little humility to get the best out of everybody, to get a solution that's going to win. Anybody that doesn't think they might be wrong is wrong. And so learning how to admit that and learning when to admit it and how to do it in a way that's both respectful of your principles and your convictions, but also humble enough to know that you're on the same trajectory same growth curve as everyone else, I think is an art, but I think it's valuable.
Yeah. And I certainly know that feeling when I've just been bowled over by an argument that I just have nothing else to say. Right? And I felt like, I feel like sometimes I watch that in other spheres where you just are kind of overwhelmed by the power of that kind of forceful shutting down. And one of the people I really admire in the religious world often makes the distinction. He says, do you want to be right or do you want to be heard?
Right.
Do you want to get through, or is it more important for you to be right?
Yeah.
And feeling right, being right feels really good and sometimes necessary. But as you said, it shuts down the conversation right away.
Yeah.
I think there's just so much right now that shuts down our conversation.
Right.
There are a lot of your questions here are just acknowledging how hard it is in social media, those who refuse to acknowledge your dignity. How do you speak with dignity? All of these things are just so humbling.
Yeah.
Because in the short term, it doesn't seem to have doesn't seem to have efficacy, right?
It doesn't. I'll just give you one other quick story. I was at a presentation day before yesterday, and a guy comes up to me afterwards, and he says, you know, this is a company we've been working with over 2 years now. He says, I was at this presentation 2 years ago, and I just want you to know this dignity index saved my marriage. And I was like, oh, that's nice. You know, what do you mean? And he said, no, I'm serious. He says, I've been married 3 years, and when I got this thing, my marriage was already over. And I was sitting in my car, and I was looking at this thing, and I realized I had to acknowledge to my wife that I needed to change. And he said, I never told her, but it's changed my entire marriage. Now, the only reason I mention it is I'm not mentioning that to brag. I'm mentioning that the thing that changed his marriage was the strength it took for him to say, this might be my fault.
This might be my fault.
I might be a part of the problem here. It's not just them, her, whatever, whoever it is. So it's not, nobody in an argument wants to say, you know, you might be right. I mean, the reason you got into an argument is because you're convinced you're right. So it's not comfortable.
I want to, speaking of not being comfortable, I think I want to acknowledge two of the hardest questions. And we're thinking about these, we're most certainly going to come up tonight. One has to do with using the dignity index to engage with white supremacists, or said another way, is there ever a situation when a historically oppressed person walks away and is not expected to engage? How does the index factor in physical and emotional safety? And then, in a parallel universe but equally terrible, when acknowledging the while acknowledging the awful loss of life last night, how do we ensure the dignity of thousands of Gazans who have never engaged in violence, right? So those are the hardest of contexts, right? And I think I just wanted to raise them. I don't have an answer to that. Maybe you have an answer, and I know you've thought about it in other contexts. But I do want to acknowledge the places where an index of our speech isn't sufficient to address the awful evil that we're up against, that that something more is needed.
Yeah.
And it may risk even contempt, because we're not going to get it right, to engage that reality. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'll try to make these points quickly. The first part of the question was about, I need to set up a boundary. There's a lot of research on this about the importance of boundaries. There's nothing in this index telling you to stay in a relationship that's violent, hurtful, oppressive, humiliating, that's robbing you of your dignity. The distinction might be that when setting up a boundary or even ending a relationship, as obviously many of us do all throughout our lives, hopefully not often, but we all end up finding ourselves needing to say, okay, I'm done, that's it, I can't do this anymore, it's over. The dignity thinking isn't telling you not to set the boundary. It might challenge you to try to wish the best for the person after you've ended it, which is hard.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is really hard. But it's not, we're not saying don't set boundaries. On second part of the question on power imbalances, the responsibility, in my view, in our view, of people when their power imbalances are very different.
Right.
So a victim of an oppressive force has a different set of responsibilities than an oppressor, and has a different set of options. There's no question about that. And when your safety is at risk, and when people are threatening you with violence or terror or these kinds of things, you have a responsibility to protect your own dignity before you have a responsibility to respect the other person's. And when you're threatening, and when you're in a position of enormous power and using it in a destructive way, you have more of a responsibility to see the dignity of the other. So again, this doesn't provide you the answer to all of those situations. We do know, though, however, let's remember, even like the white supremacist story, I mean, maybe many of you know, I think it's Darrell Daniels, who spent his whole life, I think that's Darrell Davis, spent his whole life going into the Ku Klux Klan families and trying to bring people out of a white supremacist thinking and violence. And that's all he's done. He's probably done it for 25, maybe 30 years. I'm not an expert, but there are legions of mostly, I mean, I think almost all young men who he's a black man, he's a man of faith, and that's his mission. So we can fight the powerful forces that are just trying to destroy people who are vulnerable, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but there are other ways that just trying to remind us there might be other strategies. The last point I'll make on violence, Gaza, and other things is what the Dignity Index probably suggests is sort of what in the Catholic tradition anyway we'd call just war thinking. Let's go back to, is there a circumstance under which the precise, the narrow, and the short-term use of violence is warranted to stop oppression? That goes, at least back in this. But it's also alive. I said to Mariann earlier that I presented on this at West Point, and the West Point cadets are all, this is what we need, because our mission is not to be warriors who kill. Our mission is to be people who protect peace with the minimal amount of violence. So we're trying to become people who, only when necessary, and only for the smallest number of people, only with the most limited period of time, use violence to protect. So the index is just sort of saying, if you have to go down there, make it quick, make it short, make it small, make it narrow, because then you have the chance. I mean, the post-World War II German story is maybe the best example. After World War II, most of the world didn't hate and seek revenge on Germany. The United States rebuilt Germany. The oppressors, in a way, treated them with dignity, despite the horrendous crimes, and built a country that has been, for whatever that is, 80 years, 85 years, an ally of the United States, a free country, a democratic governance, and largely free of the kind of scourge that existed there beforehand. So,
which is not what we saw happen. That's not what we're seeing in the Middle East, which is probably
that's not what we're saying.
That's the tragedy and the pain of it, and it's just so heartbreaking. And I just want to acknowledge that, and the challenge that, which doesn't mean that a tool like the Dignity Index isn't helpful. It just may not speak to every situation with the same power. If you try to apply it to every situation, there's bound to be some things that will fall off the chart, right? Which doesn't take away its power for a lens through which to build. We're coming to the end here. Just maybe one more question. And so this is, one person asked about hope, and I was asked that question. I've been asked that question every night this week, actually, in one forum or another. And the question specifically, as an Easter people, where should we find hope to propel us to have more dignity? Where do you find hope? You want to go first, or do you want me to?
Yeah, you should go first.
Okay.
Everybody wants to hear from you.
I don't know about that, but then you have the final word, which is always I mean, it's funny. I often feel like hope finds me, right? That hope is a practice. Hope is an orientation to the world that says that, as was stated so beautifully, that we will persevere, we won't give up, we will stay in relationship, we will dare to believe that that there is a spirit of goodness at work even in the darkest of times, that things are worth pursuing even if we fail, that there's something in the human spirit that God gave us to move toward hope, even if we aren't going to be the beneficiaries of what we strive for. All of those things. But in my moments of despair, when it comes as a gift. And I want to acknowledge that. Just I'm grateful for that. And then from that gift comes a practice. As with all gifts, I may not always feel hope, but I'm going to live in hope. I may not always feel love, but I will choose love, right? But if it never comes as a gift, then I don't know that I could do it. right? So I'm very grateful. And I'm also grateful because I think hope is contagious. If I lose hope, someone else might have it, and I see it in them, and they carry me for a time, and then we kind of pass the baton along, person to person, right? And kind of keep the, not to sound trite, but to keep the hope alive, right?
Yeah, beautiful.
What would you say?
Nothing.
Not fair.
What gives me hope is that you're the Bishop of Washington.
Oh,
That's
thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say it's been one of the real gifts of this year to get to meet you, to get to know you, and to work in this common field of dignity. And I hope that we all have come away tonight with a little bit of the mirror effect. I know that I have, and also renewed conviction that even sometimes if the road is long and the outcome is not within our sights today, that there is something of good to hold on to and that keeps us going. And you're a big part of that, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Budde. Thank you.
No. Thank you. There are, and you. Oh no, they're applauding for you. One, I'm gonna pray us out. Just so you know, there are tables in the back if you'd like to purchase a book that Tim co-edited. There are copies, signed copies of that, which are stories of hope, I think, that came out of the pandemic, mostly, really wonderful. And there are copies of the book that I wrote as well, if you'd like to avail yourselves of them. But may I just offer a prayer of blessing as we go. May we go forth into the world in peace. May we be of good courage. May we hold fast to all that is good. And may the blessing of our God be with us always. Amen. Amen. Blessings to you. Take good care.
Wow. You're good.